Okay, MOvember, day 11. Today, I want to share a little bit of a tool that comes from this man, Patrick Carnes. He's been a hero of mine since early recovery, once discovering that not only with drugs and alcohol addiction, I had a sex and love addiction, an avoidance addiction, and I remember reading Out of the Shadows and Don't Call It Love, and his work then became an important part of my personal recovery and then a critical part of my addiction treatment when I help others to recover. So, the thing I wanted to talk about tonight is, why am I relapsing in my addiction? We are taught as certified sex addiction therapists and working with general addiction. Patrick Carnes says that there's three things to look for. So if I'm relapsing, and it feels like a bit of a mystery, because it does for addicts sometimes, they really aren't sure what's happening, and they have, in spite of all efforts to get well and do it, they feel like they're doing everything. Because we live in a compartmentalized life and we've learnt to live in trance and distort reality, we really need help to work this out. So he gives us 3 tips. There's 3 places to look if I'm relapsing to try and get hold of my recovery. The first one, dishonesty. He says that generally right from the beginning of a relapse, the whole truth simply hasn't been told, right? So, and Patrick in his work in Facing Addiction, I did a video on it last night about if you grow up in families that are disengaged or rigid or chaotic, really as a child, very early on, we learn not to share ourselves. It's unsafe to be vulnerable. So it makes a lot of sense, to come into treatment and say, I don't trust you. I had a couple today, and the guy said, look, I didn't want to come and see you. I don't trust you. And he gave me some good reasons why. I'm a pretty, eccentric guy. I really wouldn't expect people to trust me straight away. I always wear these dungarees. I do have more pairs than one, and so eventually what we've got to make a decision after a bit of due diligence is that trustworthy people, get the whole truth. And at some point that's going to be a risk. It's always going to be a risk, but with a bit of due diligence, we need to start to trust because, I sort of sometimes think addiction recovery is a little bit like drowning out at sea. When I wave my arm, if that guy up there's wearing a yellow and red hat, Aussies I'm talking to, where the lifesaver comes out and grabs you, I don't really need to know his credentials. If he's got that hat on, someone said he can swim and he can come and save me. And I think early on, trustworthy people need to get the whole truth because we're as sick as our secrets, which is one of the key phrases. So, first thing, in a relapse, if you're constantly relapsing, are trustworthy people getting the whole truth? And if you can't trust anyone, now we know where to start because we've got to build trust somewhere with someone to get some help. Inadequate, first step. So what's the first step? The first step is we admitted we're powerless over our addiction, that our lives have become unmanageable. So the 2 key words here are powerless and unmanageable. Now I won't go through a deep definition of addiction, but what we look for in a criteria of addiction is compulsive use, impaired control, continued use in spite of consequence, the phenomenon of craving, which has the withdrawal and tolerance sort of cycle in it, and then the criteria feature of denial. We have a disease that tells us that we don't have one. So what you're looking for when someone's relapsing is generally, somewhere in this first step, they are misreading something. They are thinking that they're powerful over something they're actually powerless over. And this might be, what's an example? I remember one fella, he was an alcoholic, and he just said, look, I've been going to the fishing club for 45 years on a Tuesday night at my local club. I'm not giving that up for anybody. And he felt that he could righteously go, but he was quite powerless over that place. For 45 years, he got drunk there. And so the smell of the place, the aesthetics of the place, the company that he kept there was just simply too triggering, and he just kept relapsing. He had a lot of impaired thinking that got him back there, but essentially he was misjudging that he was powerless over that behavior, and it made his life unmanageable. So what happens in early recovery or with an addiction specialist, you want to work out what are the criteria features of addiction I have, because they become the areas of powerlessness that we need to surrender. And what are the areas of unmanageability that we create in our lives, because that's going to give us the indicators we need for what we're powerless over. Now, I'm a God-believing guy. I know that atheists and agnostics get well, but the key feature of this step is this. In Narcotics Anonymous, they say that, that what we mean by powerlessness is this inability to stop, even with the greatest willpower. What makes it a little crazy is it says, well, we do get that power back. So recovery is about being re-empowered. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, that we made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood him, are the steps out of here. But if we don't admit this, we don't even admit that we have a need for help. We don't admit that we're insane and need sanity. So with this, what you are trying to help someone with is just getting to that place that I'm powerless, but if I can work out what I'm powerless over and all the impaired thinking that allows me to do it, Narcotics Anonymous says in their literature that we get our power back once we stop justifying the reasons that we have for using. Now, if you're a decent addict, you can justify all sorts of nonsense, and that's part of the insanity and the restoration to sanity as we start telling this story, and we're going to see that there's certain things that we have limits with. And if we can radically accept those limits, the serenity prayer, we are going to go a long way to not putting ourselves back in situations that are dangerous for us. So the third thing is an insufficient recovery program. Now, there's a lot that you could say here, but essentially, if I've really misread my first step, right, as an adequate first step, then if I'm taking Panadol for cancer, generally what happens here is people think they can get away with less. And I recently had some frozen shoulders and broke my fingers, and when I in a fall, and when I went to a physiotherapist, I recognized how hard it was for those guys, because he'd give me exercises. In the end, with my physio, I said, listen, just give me the two things I really can't afford not to do, because the big elaborate program was too hard. And this part of it's critical. If I'm trying to take Panadol for cancer, I am not going to get well. And so if we're starting to bargain off and make deals with self that I'm willing to do this and not willing to do that, then we're putting ourselves at risk. Now, a therapist can never say to someone you're definitely going to use, because, I've seen plenty of addicts and alcoholics, including myself, stay sober just out of sheer spite because they don't want to give you the benefit of using. But what this is about is that I need, through that first, if I start to get honest and I get a clear picture of my addiction, then I'm going to get a clear picture of just what I need to get well. And like most illnesses that we have to get well from, we got to do some stuff, some rehab we don't want to do. And so if you're out there thinking you're going to get away with less, who's going to be affected by that decision? And also, if you've been using for a while, what's the research been on this? Generally, people, by the time they ask for help, it isn't their first rodeo. They've tried before. So what evidence have you got from your own history, from your own story, on how successful were you last time when you did this amount, when you really needed this amount? So I hope that's helpful. The three things you're looking for if you've got some relapse is dishonesty, an inadequate first step, or an insufficient recovery program. So I hope that this has been just another helpful recovery tip for MOvember. I've noticed MOvember donations rolling in, and that's really cool. It's just a nice thing to watch that happening. And I know that the MOvember funds go to a lot of really good programs, and I'll probably talk a bit about that as we get through this. So be gentle with your heart, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.